Stoner's atmosphere is at once unpretentious and grand, also remote and very private. These qualities have developed inevitably from the history of the house and of the family. For 800 years, the Stoner house and estate have passed from father to son in heired succession, except for 3 times when brother inherited from brother. Stoner, about 10 miles southeast of Dorchester, is hidden quietly in a fold of the Chiltern Hills. It has been built by the Stoner family over the centuries since about 1190. Beautiful gardens hold commanding views over beechwoods and fields, where fallow deer, never far from sight, graze and have done so since medieval times. The house of extended Tudor E-shape has a facade of warm brick with Georgian fenestrations fronting and uniting much older buildings. It is one of the few old houses in England that has remained in the family from earliest records to the present day. In the southeast corner is the famous 14th century chapel of flint and stone with a brick tower. The chapel is only one of 3 in England where Mass has been celebrated without break. Another splendid attraction in the Oxfordshire area near Dorchester is Blenheim Palace at Woodstock. It was built in 1704 for John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough, in recognition of his great victory over the French at Blenheim. It is an Italian palace set in an English park without any apparent incongruity, but the combination produces a remarkable architectural effect. Magnificent staterooms contain tapestries, paintings, sculptures and fine furniture. The long library has over 10,000 volumes in a room 53 meters long and is of outstanding beauty. There are various interesting exhibitions to view throughout the palace, including Sir Winston Churchill's birthroom, which has some of his personal belongings, letters, books and photographs on display. Surrounding Blenheim Palace is over 2,000 acres of parkland and gardens. Blenheim Gardens are renowned for their beauty and range from the former water terraces and Italian garden to the natural charm of the arboretum, pleasure grounds and cascade. Blenheim Palace is approximately 15 minutes northwest of Oxford near Woodstock and should be visited while in England. Dorchester lies at the heart of an area of unparalleled archaeological and historical interest. With the help of the spade and the written record, scholars have been working over the past century to unravel Dorchester's unique story. It is now possible to trace the history, in fact the prehistory, of man's activity in this small section of the Thames Valley. James Bond of the Oxfordshire County Museum Service explains.
Well, the first clear evidence we have of human settlement in the Dorchester area dates to the Neolithic period, about 3000 BC, when the first farmers were moving into the locality, and they seem to have settled the gravel terraces to the north and on the northern side of Dorchester, where we see the lakes now, where the gravel's been extracted. The gravel right the way through was very much a favoured settlement site because it gave rise to light, easily cultivable soils, and of course it is the sort of subsoil in which the archaeological evidence is well preserved for aerial photography. The photographs date from the 1920s onwards. Some of the important early collections of air photographs were taken by Major Allen, and he had his own small aeroplane which he used to fly along upside down, controlling the plane with a joystick between his knees and taking his photographs looking vertically downwards, flying along upside down. And we've been able to see very complicated patterns of ditches and pits cut out into the gravel terraces on the northern side of Dorchester.
Due to the expansion of the village in gravel pits, little evidence remains, but pictures taken in 1938 illustrate the complex Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments. One monument, the Cursus, is 64 meters wide and 1,650 meters in length. From the Neolithic and Bronze Age site, the tribes moved south, some 3 kilometers over the River Thames, and settled upon the Whitnam Clumps.
Well, the hill fort dates to the Iron Age period, to the pre-Roman Iron Age, and that probably begins in this area, around about 300 BC. As archaeologists, we tend to classify them by the sort of materials they used, and iron has come into quite widespread use by the time the hill forts were built across southern Britain, and these were the sort of people living here. It's the first major earthwork construction we have in the area. That is a site where we can still see clearly visible remains at the surface rather than just pick them up from aerial photography. It would probably have been permanently occupied, and I would guess that we would have a whole series of huts inside, probably circular huts in this area, surrounded by a rampart with a palisaded fence and an external ditch. It hasn't been excavated in any detail, so here we don't really know. But elsewhere, a whole range of different construction techniques can be shown, some of them involving timber lacing with timbers going into the rampart, sometimes stone revetting, quite a wide range of techniques.
During the late Iron Age, about the time of Christ, the focus of settlement again shifted.
It seems to be part of a widespread process that's happening all over southern Britain round about sort of 10 AD or thereabouts. Upland sites, hill forts seem to be being abandoned before the Roman conquest, and lowland sites like the Dyke Hills here seem to be replacing them.
The great enclosure, known to the archaeologists as an oppidum, covered 46 hectares. The Dyke Hills site had many advantages over the hill fort.
Well, I suppose one point is that it's a more sheltered spot than the rather bleak hilltop up on Whittenham Clumps. It's also quite a readily defensible site. It's on a little promontory between the River Thames behind us there and the Tame to the front, so it's a little promontory that's readily defensible simply by building the earthworks across the neck between the two rivers. There's quite a lot of room down here. There's room for a much larger settlement than was the case up on the hilltop. It's a massive construction, isn't it? Indeed, it's one of the most substantial earthworks of its date anywhere in southern Britain. And I suppose it must imply quite a sizable labour force to build earthworks of this size. And I think that's borne out to some extent by the air photograph evidence of the interior away behind us to the left there. The air photographs show masses of huts and pits and enclosures of all sorts, so clearly the interior area between the dyke and the rivers was quite intensively settled.
The Dyke Hills have not been extensively excavated, but have always been of national interest.
Later part of the 19th century, the western end of the Dyke Hills was levelled by a local farmer, and this caused a considerable outcry at the time. General Pitt Rivers, who was one of the leading figures in British archaeology, became very involved and wrote letters to the press. And it was, I think, largely as a result of his intervention that the remainder of the earthworks were preserved, and ultimately the first ancient monuments legislation in Britain was passed, which secured the future of earthwork sites of this type.
Dorchester moved again for the third time just before the Roman conquest, relocating to the north of the Dyke Hills, and there it has remained to the present day.
The first positive Roman presence we have seems to be some sort of military establishment, perhaps a small fort with timber buildings, which underlies the southern end of the Roman town. And then by about the last quarter of the 1st century AD, that's superseded by a civilian settlement with a grid of streets laid out and a series of buildings inside it. We have a record of the 12th century which suggests that at least some part of the Roman wall may have still been standing up to that point, but there's no stones of it surviving in situ today. There have been a number of small-scale archaeological excavations inside the Roman town, and we know that there were some quite substantial buildings on the street front, stone buildings with tessellated pavements and wall plaster and various factors of that sort indicating fairly high-status buildings. Interesting things about Dorchester in the Roman period is that it's very small. The area contained within the walls, which in fact came in at a comparatively late stage. I mean, it has to be said that Dorchester was unwalled in the early Roman period, and we have evidence of extramural settlements extending out beyond the walled area in several directions. But when the walls were built, first of all the earthen rampart in the 2nd century and then the stone wall in the 3rd century, the area enclosed was only just over 5.5 hectares, and this makes it one of the smallest Roman walled towns anywhere in Britain.